The issues that kind of are brought up in it. And obviously, the world changed on September 5, 1972, and we're sort of still living in the aftermath that it birthed. I'm wondering, when you read the script by director Jim Feldman and then his co-writers, Maurice Binder and Alex David, how many of those ideas were in there, and what some of those early conversations were like with Tim about the notion of how things changed and where we are now?
Well, I'll say also that this first came to me through a conversation with Sean Penn, who I ran into at a concert, and he said he was producing this and that it was going to be coming my way. And so, you know, he is quite an activist and somebody who is very interested in the state of affairs in the world. And it made me look at the script a certain way, knowing that it had interested Sean, and he put a lot into it. On the page, it was quite technical. You know, like there aren't many moments in the movie where the characters sidebar and talk about ethics. There's maybe 2 or 3, and that's pretty much apparently how it was in the day. They didn't have time to think about the big meaning of what they were doing. They were just trying to do the best they could given the circumstances. When I was young, I was always interested in journalism. I was a writer. I wrote, you know, for my school newspaper in college. I was like, it's always something that I thought was really important. And then of course I did like Shattered Glass and got to know a lot of journalists through that, and always been in the world. And so when I read the script, that was very obvious to me. I think that is why he made the film. And the documentary footage was also very important to him. And I would actually say that his approach as a filmmaker was quite journalistic. He was not willing to make anything up out of whole cloth to make the story better. He did combine a couple of characters for Leonie, and Jeffrey Mason didn't quite do all of the jobs that he does in the film. But aside from that, it's pretty accurate.
Yeah, including the production design is pretty much a very close approximation of the actual AC controls.
I mean, it turns out that there are all these people, unusual people that have the hobby of keeping analog equipment, right? And I feel like we know all of them. And all of that stuff, not all of it, 40% of that stuff actually works.
Oh, wow.
And so when we were in there and you'd hit something, something would come up. The fax machine that's in my office, they got working. It's from the time. He showed me a razor that we were thinking, I would shave with, and he was so excited. Tim came to me and he was like, look at these, it's a beautiful razor. Be the one that he uses. And I was like, maybe I don't shave. It was fetishistic on some level, and I'm into accuracy, but maybe not the fetishism.
Right. But that verisimilitude, it's there. There's all that, all those monitors, all those banks of screens. That's all showing actual archival footage. So even if you're going past it tangentially, it's all there. It's all real.
Nothing in any normal movie with any normal director, all of that would have been green screened, because it should match depending on what angle, but it doesn't if you watch the movie carefully, and I think that's great. And we got to act with it and also be reminded, which to me was one of the most interesting things about reading the script, is this moment where the games keep going. And I really had those games in my head because I'm a big fan of the movie Visions of Eight, which is like Claude Lelouch and Schlesinger and Arthur Penn all shot different events at this Olympics. And if you watch that film, it's only at the very end that they show the hostage crisis. The fact that we all managed to still play as the world burns, which is something, of course, we all do right now, the world's burning, I think is something very interesting. It was one of the things that really appealed to me.
Yeah. But also, one of the things that also just thematically that really clicked with me on this film is that how it really leaves space. You mentioned earlier that there's 1 or 2 of those kind of ideas were in the script originally, but it really leaves space for audiences to sort of inhabit this sort of, this netherworld or these ethics and kind of let you kind of figure it out for yourself, including even the fact that as the obviously there's the issues of, do we show somebody getting shot on live TV, and how they were really kind of making this up on the fly. They didn't know. But also that issue of like, well, we've got the technology to do this, not realizing that the terrorists can see the same footage that they can. There's this sort of like almost like it's a moment by moment sort of realization of what the tech can bring and what decisions that they should make on it. Like exactly what we're dealing with in so many ways now, right?
I don't think that the live camera was invented for a hostage crisis.
Yeah.
It was being used and was always thought of for things like sport. And that was the interesting thing about Roone Ulrich, is he changed the way that we watch sports by making the seat at home the best seat. Yeah. Live on camera footage, the best angle, the commentary, slow-mo, replays, yes. All of that stuff. And actually they were worried at the time that people wouldn't go to live events. And then, when this happened, he thought, let's take this new toy and point it at the balcony. And of course, we're all now living with the repercussions of that. I mean, it would have happened at some point anyway. Happened that this was doable because the events were happening 250 feet away from where they were, and they could just point the camera at it. Now we all live with this 24/7 live, sometimes coverage. And my question is it valuable to watch something live? Do you learn more by having your face right up against it? I mean, that's a rhetorical question. I would say that perspective is what gives us, the information that we need as a society to make decisions together. And that this live coverage, most of the time, is just tickling the prurient interests inside each and every one of us.
And foregoing sort of the or going for the emotions, but foregoing the analysis and kind of not having that there.
Yeah, I say that in the film. I'm like,
yeah.
They'll tell us what it all means later.
Yeah.
We're just gonna
show it.
Gobble it up.
Exactly. So let's talk about playing Roone Arledge, because obviously who at that time was already a legend because of Wide World of Sports and Monday Night Football, and then he would go on to, about 8 years after this, not just 2020, but also Nightline, working out of the Iran hostage crisis.
Ran ABC News.
Yes, that's right.
Actually, at one point at the same time that he was running ABC Sports.
Right.
And yeah, that same idea of having the people at home be able to experience the story emotionally, getting them involved on a storytelling level, not quite an information level. Also, the celebrity anchor is something that he introduced, because Jim McKay didn't quite have the star quality that we come to appreciate now. Maybe Peter Jennings, yeah. But there is a quality in Jim McKay that I really like in this movie, and one of the reasons I did the movie was when I saw the footage of him. Tim was like, what actor could do this? And I said, no actor could do that, because we're too self-involved. And also, every news anchor we have now is too self-involved to let information just come through them without putting a spin on it, without emoting around it. So, his legacy, Roone's legacy, I would say is a mixed one. There's no question that he is one of the most influential people in media in the latter part of the 20th century. He was not someone that I knew by name, but when I saw his face, I was like, oh yeah, that guy,
There's also, you guys had worked with Jeff Mason, have been doing events with him as well, because Mason is still with us. Arledge died in 2002. But also Jim McKay's son, I believe, right, was with CBS News at the time, was an advisor and gave feedback in a lot of ways. Is that right?
Yeah, he was there as a teenager. He was at the hotel, like the teenager would be. And a lot of these guys are the ones that made it possible for us to make the movie, because none of us were willing to make this movie without the archival footage. I mean, it would have just been another movie. We thought that was the real key, not just the Jim McKay footage, but that footage of the German official, that bizarre cognitive dissonance where he knows they're dead, but he can't say they're dead. And I would say that shame, that guilt that's from the previous Olympics, which was used for propaganda, is part of the problem in the movie.
Yeah, and that's another layer to this film that I really find so interesting, is obviously, right, what the German authorities and everybody was trying to do, obviously, 36 years after the 1936 Olympics, 27 years after World War II, how there was this sort of hesitancy and yet this sort of eagerness and all of this kind of complicated emotional politics, to coin a phrase, that was going on with everybody there at the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, they called it the Happy Games, and they were determined for it to be the Happy Games.
Oh,
it's like having a party and somebody's throwing up in their bathroom, and you're just like, turn up the music. I found it really, really fascinating. Leonie Benish obviously can speak better to that. It was really incredible to film this in Munich at the Bavaria Studios. I actually was filming Presumed Innocent here in the States. I'd been doing it for 2 months, flew there, and in 3 days started this, worked 6-day weeks, doing it for 3 weeks, came back, jumped straight back into Presumed Innocent.
Oh my gosh.
The characters do look, they have the same haircut. But they're different people. They're definitely different people. But when I first landed there, the absolute first thing I did was I got one of those Lime scooters and took it beyond where we were supposed to take it to the Olympic Village. And just stood there. Everything's still there. It's student housing now. And it just, there's like this thing, people ask me about playing a real person or real events. There's no trick to it. You don't imitate people, but I do really remind myself that it happened.
Yeah.
And it was really helpful to be in Munich and stand there and every day be able to go, it happened, right over that way. And to have these Germans, many of them from Munich, including Tim, who's Swiss but went to school in Munich, they all told me this is like something people carry around all the time. This is like an event that, information still comes out about. It's like, how were we culpable? How did we allow this to happen? It's something that's still in everyone's mind.
Yeah. I feel like it's a good time to note also that obviously for all the copious amounts of archival in the film, Tim chose to reenact the moments of the terrorist on the balcony and things like that out of respect for the victims, right? There was sort of a moment.
Anytime a victim would be seen, that is not.
That's
I think it's right, I think it's right.
Let's also ask for a round of applause, please, for the amazing ensemble that works with Peter in the film. John McGarrow, Ben Chaplin,
Rory Cochran. I mean, all these there are so many actors in that room that have like 2 lines and were there for a month and a half. And we would stop production sometimes where, Rory, the guy who patches everything through, would be like, let's go through how the patch works. And in any other movie, they're like, we're going to show you twisting 2 wires, and you don't have to worry about that. And he'd be like, no, I have to figure this out. And that kind of teamwork, I think, is what makes the film be what it is, because it was wildly collaborative. It didn't matter what your job was there. You could say, wait, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And then we were talking before we came on stage. The film really exists for me on a really great trajectory of starting with something like Billy Wilder's Ace in the Hole and Elia Kazan's A Face in the Crowd, but then also Spotlight and The Post and All the President's Men, and even to a degree Network, though it takes a satiric point of view. There's something important about that, about what needs to be told when and how in some ways, right? Yeah.
Shattered glass.
It's Shattered Glass, exactly. You guys also, just in terms of research and talking about the ensemble, you guys, many of you went to control rooms to kind of figure out the rapport and how that dynamic sort of works a little bit?
Really, John spent the most time in control rooms. I actually have been in control rooms quite a bit because a good friend of mine does this for a living, and it's the way I used to get into see games and so I've been around it a fair amount and was always really interested in it. It's like you walk into one of those control rooms and no one's ever shouting, but everyone's shouting on the inside.
Yeah.
They're like, everyone's really focused and go on too. And it's like, it feels like a movie, actually. And it was really helpful for me just to remind myself that the stakes in the movie were not something that we had to create as actors. All we had to do was what our job was, and that's always nice.
There's 2 points I want to bring up too. One is that, and we were talking about how all the monitors have archival footage on there. There's also like the reflection in your glasses. There's often these notions of kind of double vision to pick one phrase, where obviously there's the things that are going on that Arledge is making decisions on, but you're seeing the reflections of things in the glasses, which is really a beautiful poetic note.
So, I mean, I know that Rune wore glasses, but when I arrived there, I sort of assumed that I was just going to put on some clothes from the period and play the part, and Tim was really into the glasses, and he was like, well, he wore glasses. I said, so? He said, no, but I really want you to wear glasses. And he actually showed me a picture of Russell Crowe from The Insider, and he was like, this is what I'm talking about. And I was like, okay, you're the filmmaker. I'll wear glasses. And then sometimes he would take my glasses and smudge them.
Yes, so they wouldn't reflect.
And I put them back on and be like, I'm gonna wear these glasses smudged. He's like, you're working so hard, you don't know they're smudged. Like, yeah, I wear glasses, and for me, if they're smudged, you're working too hard.
Yes.
So he was, as a filmmaker, you know, sometimes when you're working with someone, you can tell that something that normally you would be responsible for is a priority for them, and that's called collaborating.
Yeah, I just love that notion that there's the reflection sort of says that there's always this other thing that Arledge is looking
I'm
for.
sure that was on his mind.
Yeah. And then one other thing, we mentioned the production design. Julian Wagner is the production designer. It sort of is this, it's like a maze that you guys all had to go through, which I think sort of, again, it sort of has a narrative correlative, which is that, you know, that team is trying to figure out the maze of immediacy over that 22 hours or whatever of what to do. And I think the production design reflects that, right?
Well, this entire place was built at a 1-to-1 ratio to the original place. Everything is built as it was, and it was very difficult to film in because, you know, they didn't design that original space to be filmed in. And it's 2 cameras, it's 3 people on each camera, and it was like having the most obnoxious documentary film crew around you all the time. You know, and he likes to film where, you know, typically we would show up in the morning, all the actors go through the works together, we arrive on set together, the actors would work on the scene, and Tim participated, but really the actors worked out everything we're doing because we knew what our tasks were, we knew what our jobs were, where we would be, we were all familiar with everything. And then Tim would come in and figure out how to shoot it, and then, he maybe shoot it according to plan a few times, and then everything would be a wild one. You would go, wild one. And that meant a camera could be coming this way, a cable could be going over your lap, you'd step over it, you'd pull back around, there's a camera pointing at you, and so I actually really like, you know, some actors don't like seeing the camera, the crew, and everything. I always incorporate them. They're part of my world. I don't ignore them. I don't stare at the boom guy and wonder why he's miking me as the character, but I'm aware of my surroundings almost like an athlete is, right? You know, this guy's making a run down this way. And actually I come from sport, so there's a lot of that feeling to me, especially in this movie, that where sport is the subject on some level. It felt like sport to me.
Yeah,
you know?
It has that adrenaline quality too. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which obviously the best journalism does as well, which is such an important aspect of this film. And I'd like to wrap up, Peter, by asking, in terms of when either you've spoken with journalists who've seen the film, or perhaps Mason himself, what sort of their reactions have been, or what kind of feedback they gave to you?
I mean, journalists love it when you do anything about them. You know, they're not hard to please. I mean, it's like you make any movie that's about journalism, and they're all really excited. I mean, my friend Rick Rowley, who I was hanging out with yesterday, who made the film Dirty Wars. If you guys saw that, it won the Academy Award a number of years ago. He and I were talking about it, and just about keeping the idea of the importance of journalism in everyone's mind, right? Like, there's no putting this genie back in the bottle.
No.
There's a million journalists online that call themselves journalists that may or may not be saying what's really happening. There's a million different versions of the story, not just an interpretation of the story, but like, did this happen and that happened and then that happened? Everyone's fudging with the facts. So it's just, I think, nice to be reminded that in a democracy, especially, where we have to make informed choices, that this is a fundamental part of democracy as much as any other branch. And I like that about it. And I will say one more thing, just because I know this is on people's minds, is we did make this film before October 7th. And we had finished editing it about 6 weeks before. And we all got together and we were like, what does this mean? You know, and how does this either change or amplify what we're talking about? And I think because the film is about journalism and who gets to tell the story and how do we consume the story, and it is the same story from 1972 as it is today, it's just amplified, then in the end we really believed that it would amplify the actual message of the movie, which is, I don't think, political, but that's for everyone to figure out on their own.
Right. Which is one of the great things about this film is that it engages us in so many ways. Thank you so much, Peter, for being here. Peter Sarsgaard, ladies and gentlemen. The film is September 5. It goes wide on January 17th. Thank you.
Bravo.